Okay, so middle schoolers, I wanted to just do a really quick demonstration on your project steps. Depending on where you're at, you might be in a different position and might be doing something different than your neighbor. So I just want to make sure it's clear to everybody kind of what direction they need to go in today for class. So what I have is I have a little step-by-step sheet that I created for you that kind of just briefly goes over what you're going to be doing today. So if you have not done step one yet, step one is going to be to draw your landscape lightly in pencil. So remember, we were working on showing the illusion of space in a landscape or seascape or some kind of outdoor scene by using at least 3 techniques. So you can overlap subject matter, you can create a foreground, middle ground, and background, and then change the size of some of your subjects in your landscape to make it look like there's depth. You could use a vanishing point to make it look like there's depth in your art, such as a river or a road or path or some sort. Or you can think about using some value or shading or like color changes to create some shadows and highlights and things like that when it comes to your painting later. So if you have not completed that first step, there is watercolor paper on the brown table in the room today. You can start on a new sheet. Please make sure you put your name on your paper so that I can give you credit where credit is due. After you finish drawing it lightly in pencil, your next step then is to start to add some oil pastels to kind of add like a sketch-like outline around your subject matter, kind of imitating that brush mark look that we see in the Impressionist style. Now, I know some of you have already watercolored a very thin layer or wash on your paper. If you have done that, you are still going to be adding the pastels on top of that watercolor now that it is dry today. We will continue the watercolor next week when I return, and we will be doing some of the brush marks with the watercolor as well on top of the pastels or next to them on your paper. So we are still watercoloring, but the pastel is going to be an added mixed media that's going to just give it a little bit more of that push of that Impressionist style. So depending on where you're at, if you just finished your sketch and you have just the pencil outlines on your paper, you're going to be taking the pastels today and matching the colors of your theme with the pastels in a sketchy kind of quick movement type of drawing. However, even though it's quick, it still needs to be intentional, which means that I'm going to think about my marks before I make them and not just scribble, dribble, drabble all over the place. So if this is my water in the background here and I have my pencil lines, I'm going to take a blue pastel and I'm going to create some kind of quick lines that maybe give it some of that ripple effect to make it look like maybe there's some movement in the water. I'm kind of thinking about, you know, the length of my lines. Some are longer than others, some are a little bit shorter. But there's some space in between and it's kind of even throughout and it's thought about. It's not just quick and mindless, it's intentional. So maybe I'll use a lighter blue as well so that I have a couple different colors in there. And I'm going to just kind of add these lines in there to give it some of that brush mark kind of look that we're going to be thinking about with that Impressionist style. Okay, so I'm not filling in any spaces. I'm not going to go over it with the pastel and just fill it in. I'm just adding those lines today. With that being said, oil pastel is going to resist. It's going to push off the watercolor when we use it later, so you can brush right over it and it's not going to be an issue. Thinking about the colors that I'm using, if I have my palm tree here, again, not all of my lines are connected because they're meant to look kind of like those brush marks. So I'm going to come in maybe with some of these V shapes around my palm tree, maybe just a couple lines here and there. Okay, I have some palm trees off in the distance over here. I'm going to come into those and I'm just going to make little lines. It's really when they're off in the distance, we know that they don't have a lot of detail. So I don't need to think as much about my details. These are more sketch lines that just imply that there's a tree off in the distance. Same with my brown. I might just add a couple little lines in there. If you have already done your wash and you have a thin layer of watercolor on your paper already, you're going to go on top of that with those pastels and just add a little bit of texture lines or a little bit of those brush mark type of lines over the top of your watercolor already. This does not mean you're done with your watercolor. We're still going to come in next week and we're going to add some different shades or kind of light and dark of those watercolors to add those brush marks. But today you're just going to come in and maybe find some of those pencil lines again and go over them and just, you know, kind of make sure that we can see where there's a separation. If you have a tree on the ground, kind of create that separation between some of your spaces. Maybe even giving it a little bit of texture. So if this is my grass, I might come in and just give it some little texture lines to make it look like there's some grass there. If I have my mountains back here, I might think about just coming in and finding some of those areas and give it some texture and just go through my space. All right. The watercolor wash is very thin if you've already done it, and it will be layered. Oh, that was kind of dirty. It will layer as we come back through with our watercolor next week. We'll add some more layers on top of this, so you should start to see those pencil lines disappear. Okay, so my lines are thought about, they're quick, kind of sketchy, just giving it more of that brush mark kind of look. Do not fill in the pastels and don't overwork it. You just want a few here and there just to kind of emphasize those brush marks that we're thinking about when we think about that Impressionist style. If you complete this step today, you will wait until next week to do your watercolor. If you have not watercolored yet, it is okay. You're going to just go on with pastels first, and then we will do your thin layer or wash after that next week. So remember your project steps. Draw lightly with your pencil because those dark lines might show through some of that watercolor if they're too dark. Remember to show the illusion of space like we discussed, and then those oil pastels come on top, either if you have the wash already or not.